Hello everyone, my name's Carter and today I want to talk to you about one of my all-time favorite films, Whit Stillman's The Last Days of Disco. Released in 1998, The Last Days of Disco is a comedy drama that takes place in the early 1980s at the height of the disco era. It is also the third and final installment in what I like to call Whit Stillman's bourgeois trilogy of films, with 1990's Metropolitan and 1994's Barcelona preceding it. The film follows two recent college graduates, Alice Kinnan and Charlotte Pingras, played by Chloe Sevigny and Kate Beckinsale, as they navigate the ups and downs of life in New York City. They work at a publishing house during the day and frequent a popular Studio 54-type club at night, where they socialize with a colorful cast of characters. The film opens with Alice and Charlotte walking to the club and debating whether they'll get in. Alice says she's heard it's easier to get in if you come by cab, and after seeing the crowd that awaits outside the club, that's exactly what they do. We then cut to Jimmy Steinway, played by Mackenzie Aston, in a limo, schmoozing some clients. The guys have essentially the same conversation that the girls do. They don't know whether they'll get in. Jimmy makes the mistake of asking Marshall, the older gentleman, to cover up his ugly suit jacket with Jimmy's more plain-looking suit jacket.
When we get out, don't stop where the crowd is. Just follow me right in.
When we get out, we'll just follow you in.
Yeah. Why don't you put this on?
What?
Just until we get inside.
I don't get it.
He asked Marshall to do this because he felt his outfit might jeopardize the group's chances of getting into the club. This instinct ends up being correct, and Van, played by the ever-monotonous Burr Steers, denies the group entry.
These are my friends.
You can go in, but they'll have to wait. Hey, nice coat.
Even though he had just been publicly humiliated, Jimmy was still determined to show his clients a good time, so they decide to sneak in through the back. Alice and Charlotte then pass by the group of guys. Alice notices Jimmy, which shifts the topic of conversation from the club to Alice's love life.
It's Jimmy Steinway. I can't believe it. He's already leaving? You like him? I could never be interested in anyone who worked in advertising.
They then arrive at the club and immediately get in, just as Charlotte predicted. Once inside the club, the world that Whit Stillman has crafted comes alive. People are socializing, drinking, dancing, and enjoying all the things that the disco era has to offer. And even with all these exciting things, Charlotte's still more concerned with Alice's love life, continuing to pry, asking who's the other guy that she liked. Alice confesses she had a crush on another guy named Tom Platt. Charlotte seems more approving of this crush for some reason. She then goes on to give Alice unsolicited advice on how to get men, saying that she was far too critical in college and men don't like that. In a sense, she came off as inaccessible to them, in Charlotte's words. Back outside the club, a woman runs out crying, and Des McGrath, one of the club's managers, played by Chris Eigenman, chases after her and pleads for her to stop. He catches up to her and tries to explain himself. He tells her he recently discovered he's gay, but this is an elaborate lie he's crafted to get out of any consequence of sleeping with multiple women. On the way back inside, Van stops Des and says that Bernie, their boss, has promised to fire Des if he catches any more of his advertising friends in there. We're then introduced to Josh Neff and Tom Platt, the other guy that Alice was interested in, sitting in a diner and having a conversation about the entire social scene of the disco era. Tom seems rather indifferent, but Josh gives a full impassioned speech on what it means to him to finally be able to experience this new era, but how it's taken on an air of exclusivity and it's even harder to get into the clubs.
What I found terribly encouraging was the idea that when the time in life came to have a social life, there'd be all these great places for people to go to, because, as you'll remember, for many years there were none. What I didn't realize is that it gets so impossible to get into.
Back at the club, Jimmy and one of his other clients, Hap, are inside, but the other two clients, Marshall and Steve, have left as they were too embarrassed by the incident at the door. Jimmy sits at a table and begins to pout, feeling sorry for himself over what he asked Marshall to do. Charlotte and Alice then approach the men, and Charlotte delivers one of the most awkward pickup lines I've ever seen.
Excuse me, has anyone ever told you you look just like Kate Preston's brother, Rod?
Who?
Rod Preston? Do you know him?
No.
Have you ever noticed how people who look just alike never seem to know each other?
Charlotte and Hap go off to the dance floor, while Alice stays behind to try and comfort Jimmy. Jimmy tells her his sob story of how he embarrassed one of his clients and how he majorly messed up, insisting that he's stupid for it.
It's not stupid. The club's really hard to get into.
It was unbelievably, incredibly dumb. He's a really nice guy, and I insulted him. And this nice guy that I stupidly insulted is basically my boss. God, it was really stupid.
Guess you're right. It was pretty stupid.
To recover from this outburst, he offers to buy Alice a drink. Tom and Josh then arrive at the club. Tom spots Alice from across the room and goes to dance with her. On his way to get a drink, Jimmy runs into Des. Des tells him that Bernie's promised to fire him if he catches Jimmy in the club, and ejects him. Jimmy's frustrated by this and tells Des to at least tell his client that he was ejected, and to give the drink to that annoying girl occupying his booth. As the guys part ways, another woman approaches Des and tells him that they need to talk. He begins to spin his "I'm gay" tale once again, giving more backstory into it this time.
Exactly when did the final realization come?
2 days ago. I get up late and usually turn on the TV sort of as a reflex. Wednesday afternoon, there was a rerun of Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha's nature program with Marlon Perkins. And that attractive, younger guy, it triggered something. Suddenly, everything fell into place. I'm gay, and always have been.
As Des has this conversation, Alice eavesdrops from the next table over. Charlotte calls her on this, and then proceeds to give her even more unsolicited advice.
This is gonna sound dumb, but it really works. Whenever you can, throw the word sexy into your conversation. It's kind of a signal. Like, there's something really sexy about strobe lights. Or, this fabric is so sexy.
Yeah, it is.
After breaking yet another girl's heart, Des runs into Josh, and he seems shocked to see him for some unknown reason, and is even more shocked to hear that he's working as an assistant district attorney. On a whim, Alice decides to go home with Tom. As they're walking along the street, Tom gives a speech on how he feels that Bambi is one of the sole reasons that hunting has fallen out of favor as a sport, saying that to this day no one wants to identify with the hunters, but more so with Bambi having lost its mother. He finishes his pretentious speech and then asks Alice about her living situation. She explains that she's in an all-girls residence, so no visitors. So they proceed to go back to Tom's house. Alice decides to take Charlotte's advice for some reason, but ends up overcompensating, going as far to call Tom's collection of antique Scrooge McDuck comics sexy.
What's this?
I collect original edition Scrooge McDuck comics. No, it sounds a little odd.
Not at all.
This is original artwork by Carl Barks, who created the Uncle Scrooge comics. He's considered a bit of a genius.
There's something really sexy about Scrooge McDuck.
You really think so?
Love Uncle Scrooge.
The next morning, Alice does the walk of shame, and Charlotte pesters her about where she was the night before. The conversation doesn't last long as the girls begin to ask other co-workers how they can accelerate their careers as they're having trouble maintaining their lavish lifestyles. We're then introduced to one of the girls' co-workers, Dan, who comes off as extremely irritating and pretentious, calling them daddy's girls and claiming that they don't have to worry about paying rent, when in fact they do.
Alice and I have been looking at apartments, but we can't afford one on what we get as assistants.
That's so comical.
What?
That girls like you really worry about paying the rent. Aren't your fathers heavily subsidizing your living expenses with big allowances?
They're not big at all.
In a few years, you'll marry some incredibly rich corporate lawyers. It's not as if you really worry about paying the rent like the rest of us.
Oh, you worry about paying the rent?
Yeah.
Then you're way ahead of us because we don't even have an apartment.
What if in a few years we don't marry some corporate lawyer? What if we marry some meatball like you? Or not you personally, but someone with similarly low socioeconomic prospects.
Can you believe that? They really think that way.
Since they're struggling to pay rent, Charlotte suggests that her and Alice move in together. Alice is reluctant as she's not even sure if her and Charlotte like each other, which is pretty apparent.
Do you really think we know each other well enough to room together?
Well, maybe that's good.
It's not just that we don't know each other well. I'm not even sure we really like each other.
That's okay.
Regardless of all the tension, the plan proceeds and the girls go to look at apartments together. They seemingly pick the first one that they look at, which has a terribly awkward layout known as a railroad-style apartment.
So, to get to the bathroom from the living room, you have to climb through both bedrooms?
Well, there are 2 outside doors. So, in theory, you can use the exterior hall to go between the kitchen and the living room.
Alice is reluctant due to the apartment's layout, but Charlotte once again makes the executive decision for the group, saying they'll take it.
So what do you think?
I think it's really nice. Isn't the layout a bit awkward?
Well, I think we should take it.
On move-in day, Dan is walking by the apartment while the girls are unloading boxes, and he makes a rude remark.
It's good to see bourgeois girls building up a sweat.
Alice and Charlotte go inside, not wanting to deal with Dan, leaving him there with Holly.
Are you rooming with them? That's gonna be really tough.
The girls then host a dinner party, but are upset to find out that Holly invited Dan without their knowledge.
Hello?
Dan.
Dan?
Hi, come up. Dan from your department.
I invited him.
Departmental Dan?
You know, he went to Harvard. So?
Alice is even more enraged when she finds out that Charlotte invited Jimmy. She reminds her that she said she could never like someone in advertising. Later, the guests arrive. Jimmy tries to compliment the apartment, saying that despite the awkward layout, he thinks it seems nice. But Dan does not share the sentiment and criticizes the girls for taking it.
These apartments were actually planned in the last century as tenement housing for working-class families. Now the yuppie roommate combos are crowding them out.
Well, that's just tough.
After dinner, the group goes back to the club. Dan seems kind of reluctant to go, but it seems he's more just uncertain whether he'll get in. Charlotte reassures him he'll get in, though, because he has Holly and she's beautiful. Once inside, Des intercepts Jimmy to ask him about some business practices that he thinks are a little shady going on through the club.
Look at this. Kind of worrisome, don't you think?
Yeah.
To me, shipping cash to Switzerland in canvas bags doesn't sound honest. To me, it suggests possible illegality.
Well, what are you gonna do?
Well, I'm not going into that room anymore.
Gimlet, please.
Back upstairs on the dance floor, Josh approaches Alice, trying to politely introduce himself. But Charlotte swoops in, telling him that they're there as a group and he's not very welcome.
Excuse me. You're Alice Kinnan, aren't you?
Yeah?
We met at that party inside Carver Labor Day weekend. How much is that? You were just coming in as I was leaving and you asked me where the kitchen was. Do you remember?
I do remember getting to the kitchen.
Excuse us. We're here sort of as a group. If you don't mind.
Excuse me.
Why did you say that?
I didn't like the look of him at all. Did you notice how he was eyeballing you? Creepy. Frankly, I thought he might have been the guy that bothered me on the subway. I'm sorry if I overreacted.
Alice then meets up with Tom again, where she learns that the night that they slept together, he was actually on a trial separation from his longtime girlfriend. But after his and Alice's encounter, he decided he wanted the separation to be over and went back to his girlfriend. He tells Alice that she was the reason he went back to his girlfriend, saying that he thought he had found someone to share a connection with, a sentient being, but that Alice was no different than the other girls and just dumbed herself down in order to have sex.
What?
I shouldn't talk about it. I just end up sounding like an idiot.
No, what?
You're very sexy and good-looking and modern and hot but what I was craving was a sort of sentient individual who wouldn't abandon her intelligence to hop into bed with every guy she meets in a nightclub. Why is it that when people have sex with strangers on their mind, their IQ just drops, like 40 points? All that affected, sexy, seductress slinking around that Uncle Scrooge is sexy.
In my opinion, Tom has no right to be mad. He also made the decision to have sex with Alice. If he was aware that she was playing dumb, he's just as complicit for playing dumb and ignoring it just to have sex with her. For him to tear her down this way is entirely unfair to Alice. While this is going on, Des gets approached by Van and Bernie for bringing Jimmy into the club once again. This time, Des doesn't get off easy and is fired. as well as the whole group being ejected from the club.
You're fired, Des. You're out of here.
You can't fire me, Van. Only Bernie can fire me.
Okay. You're fired. And take this yuppie scum with you.
On their way out, the group have one of my favorite discussions throughout the film on the connotations of being a yuppie and whether or not they exist. We'll watch a clip of that here.
Yuppie scum? In college, before dropping out, I took a course in the propaganda uses of language. One objective is to deny other people's humanity, or even right to exist.
In the men's lounge, someone scrawled, "Kill yuppie scum."
Do yuppies even exist? No one says, I am a yuppie. It's always the other guy who's a yuppie. I think for a group to exist, somebody has to admit to be part of it.
Of course yuppies exist. Most people would say you two are prime specimens.
We're not yuppies.
You think we're yuppies?
You're seriously saying you're not the yuppies?
No.
Yuppie stands for Young, Upwardly Mobile Professional. Nightclub flunky is not a professional category.
The group arrives at another bar called Rex's. They chose to go to Rex's because Des said Bernie would know where to find him when he realizes he made a mistake. Charlotte then claims to have the talent to be able to tell whether a man is gay just by looking into his eyes. She looks at Jimmy first and says that he's not gay. She then turns her attention to Des, saying he doesn't have gay eyes but has a gay mouth. Des gets offended by this and becomes combative.
That's the dark side of feminism.
What?
Do you have a kind of free pass to make any kind of wounding or derogatory comment you want?
I am hardly a militant feminist.
No, you're not. A militant feminist would be a lot fairer. It is women like you whose attitudes to men are so dehumanizing.
Like what?
That men are swine, obsessed with large breasts and the sex act, devoid of any idealistic or romantic sensibility, when in fact, we have that idealistic sensibility in spades.
He then goes on to tell a story about a time he was deeply infatuated with a girl.
When I was in college, there was a girl I had a crush on who always had older boyfriends, invariably some senior. Finally, they all graduated, and one night, we went back to her room alone. Suddenly, her shirt was off, and I was confronted with these breasts, which turned out to be completely surprising and frankly disconcerting. They were rather large and not ugly or especially strange shaped, but in all the time that I had thought about her, these breasts had never figured.
He then claims that the girl's name was Alice, but Jimmy quickly calls him on this and gets upset. Jimmy and Charlotte then get up to dance as they're done dealing with Dez's antics, but leave Alice there with him. Des then makes a lame attempt at comforting Charlotte as he explains that he knows the details of what happened with her and Tom, and that he thinks she's some sort of slut. Alice is offended by this, but for some reason chooses to continue the conversation. After a little bit, Charlotte and Jimmy come back to the table, saying that they're going home. After the couples leave, Alice is upset because Charlotte had previously expressed that same night that the aspect of group socializing was much more important than all this feverish pairing off that people do.
All week, Charlotte's been talking about the tremendous importance of group social life, opposing all this ferocious pairing off.
Well, group social life has its place, but at a certain point, other biological factors come into play. Our bodies weren't really designed for group social life. A certain amount of pairing off was always part of the original plan.
For Alice, this comment is the last straw, and she storms out of the bar. As Des chases after her, an employee at the bar comes to tell him that Bernie wants him back. He then rushes out after her, trying to use the moment of emotional vulnerability to try and sleep with her, proposing that they go out on a date, or that they should go home together. Alice arrives back at the apartment and has to maneuver around the awkward layout to avoid Charlotte and Jimmy having sex, and Dan and Holly making out on the couch. Dan stops making out with Holly for a moment to ask Alice about one of her genuine interests, about what her dream book to publish would be.
A collection of new J.D. Salinger stories, but more in the direction of The Laughing Man, or Beside the Weeping Carpenters. Not Hopper 16 or Seymour an introduction.
But he immediately shoots her down, expressing that there was some critics that completely dismantled Salinger's work. In the morning, Charlotte approaches Alice and confronts her about clomping around the apartment like she's angry.
What's the matter now?
What?
All the noise, clumping around, banging pans.
Sorry, I didn't realize it.
You obviously intended it.
What do you mean?
It's very aggressive. You don't clump around banging pans for no reason.
Like what reason?
You know perfectly well.
Because I only bang pans?
Alice tries to express her emotions, But when she realizes that Charlotte's not hearing it, she makes the mature decision to walk away. Charlotte chases out the door after her and yells out what is what I imagine her best form of an apology.
Okay, anything I did that was wrong, I apologize for. But anything I did that was not wrong, I don't apologize for.
At work, Dan inquires Alice about Holly's level of intellect, kind of what Charlotte was warning Alice about before. And it shows you truly how vain all these characters are, not being able to see beyond academic intelligence or just outward beauty. Alice shuts down the conversation with Dan as she's more focused on work. She thinks she's found a book penned by the Dalai Lama's brother that she thinks could be a bestseller. Charlotte thinks it's a waste of her time, but in reality, it's a good idea and she's just threatened that Alice has found it. It's then revealed that the reason Josh had such a feverish love for disco was partly because of his genuine love for the socialization and the music and the atmosphere of the club, but was also in part because as an ADA, he was investigating the notorious money laundering and drug trafficking that occurred through disco clubs throughout the 80s. Back at the club, the group sit around socializing, but Charlotte immediately calls out Alice for the fact that she's not drinking. Rather than just respecting Alice's decision to not drink, as any friend should, Charlotte continues to pry, finally settling on the fact that Alice must have VD and is on antibiotics, and that's why she can't drink. Alice understandably gets upset and storms away. Charlotte doesn't even realize any wrongdoing until Jimmy reprimands her, questioning how she could say something so rude to her friend out loud in front of so many people. She then runs after Alice to apologize, but the apology quickly dissolves when she claims that her announcing it to the group of people was a good thing.
You'll be more popular than ever. Watch. VD's not all bad. You'll find there are actually positive aspects to it.
In the bathroom, Jimmy catches Des using coke once again. He's disappointed and warns Des that something's going on in the club, and if he's not careful, he could go down with it. On the way out of the bathroom, Nina, the woman from the start of the movie, makes another appearance. Somehow she's discovered that Des lied about being gay.
You completely humiliated me.
I could be gay.
You're saying again you're gay? Tell me honestly, have you had sex with men?
Well, that's defining it rather narrowly.
This moment marks the era's decline. We're then treated to a montage of footage from the death of disco. Records being burned, mobs ensuing in baseball stadiums. All of a sudden, nobody wanted to listen to disco anymore. Even though disco is dead, life for the friend group must continue. Back at work, Dan has somewhat shifted his sights to Alice, but thankfully she shuts him down quickly. Alice then meets up with Tom and confronts him about giving her an STI. He's in first at denial about this, wondering if she's sure that it was him that gave it to her. But she's certain as she reveals that she was a virgin when they had sex.
I can't believe that. The first time you make love, I give you both G and an H infection.
H?
Tom had sex with Alice, knowingly having herpes. I'm just gonna leave that one there. Tom Platt is a terrible man. After this, Alice is inexplicably closer with Des. Perhaps it was because she views herself as less and deserves less because of what Tom did to her. I assure you that isn't the case. In real life, if this were to happen, you are not worth less because someone did that to you. Having those feelings is understandable and natural, but I promise, it's not your fault. One night at the club, the group gathers again, but the vibe is different than what we've come to know. Charlotte and Jimmy are still together, Dan and Holly have broken up, but Des and Alice are together, and now Josh joins the group as a friend. The conversation ends up shifting in a weird way after Charlotte says that she found Lady and the Tramp charming. Everyone has their own take on this. Josh is Charlotte's biggest detractor on this statement. He claims that Lady and the Tramp is the type of story that conditions young people to accept the smooth-talking jerk rather than the noble hero who actually makes an effort. Alice agrees with Josh's take on it, and this upsets Des, as the conversation is clearly not about cartoon dogs and about the love triangle that Josh, Alice, and Des find themselves in.
Isn't the whole point that Tramp changes? Okay, maybe in the past he stole chickens, ran around without a license, and wasn't always sincere with members of the opposite sex. But through his love for Lady and the beneficent influences of fatherhood and matrimony, he changes and becomes a valued member of that, rather idyllic household.
Josh agrees that at first it may appear that there's a change, but soon enough Tramp will be back drinking and abusing Lady. After insinuating that people can't change, Des is enraged and suggests that Josh is off his meds, and questions whether his employer knows about his psychiatric state. For fans of Whit Stillman, the next scene is a real treat. Jimmy runs into Ted Boynton from Whit Stillman's previous film, Barcelona. Ted presents Jimmy with the prospect of a job in Barcelona, as he had lost his job with his marketing agency after not being able to get clients into the club anymore.
Have you found anything else?
No.
Any leads?
No.
You know, there's a lot of agencies in Spain looking for people with experience from here. There's one in Madrid some brunette people have affiliated with. I could give them a call.
That sounds great.
We then cut back to Des and Alice. Des tries to make a noble apology, saying that he didn't truly identify with Tramp, he just felt bad because no one was defending him. For some reason, Alice seems to buy this, and they share a kiss on the balcony. Josh sees this and is upset. After this, Josh goes to the DA's office and tells them that he can't work the case anymore as there's a conflict of interest. His employer is confused because they've already discussed it and said that his relation to Des is of no concern to the case. Jimmy insists that it would be a hindrance now as he has feelings for Alice and his jealousy of Des would get the best of him. Back at the club, Des is called into Bernie's office, where Bernie tells him of the investigation that's been going on. He then insinuates that Des has been the one allowing the people to get into the club to be able to investigate.
Do you know how they got in?
No. Could Van be letting him in?
They're coming in as ad agency clients.
What?
Des tries to cover his tracks by saying that the authorities had approached him, but had said nothing more. Bernie then catches him on a grammatical error, proving that he's much smarter than he's let on to be.
Why did you use the past perfect then?
I used the past perfect?
Yeah, I was approached. Sounds like a while ago.
Josh overcomes his jealousy and goes to the club to warn Des about the ensuing sting operation. He tells Des that if he doesn't get clean, he's going to be in trouble because the authorities will do drug testing and he'll go down with the club. Just outside the club, Jimmy is talking with Van when two individuals passing by assault Jimmy with a lead pipe.
Rocky can get that. Sounds great. That's it.
Ciao. Good night.
It very well could have been a random act of violence, but I feel it was a hit put out by Bernie on Jimmy for getting the agents into the club. The group go to the hospital with Jimmy, where he reveals to Des that he's known about the sting operation for much longer than he's let on. Des is at first a little angry with Jimmy for keeping it secret from him, but seems somewhat understanding. Jimmy then gets nostalgic and begins romanticizing and fantasizing about the club, calling it the greatest club the world's ever seen, and he has this feeling that it could just be destroyed that very night.
I have a very bad feeling about the club, Des. It's like a meteorite is headed straight for it. It's going to destroy everything. The greatest club the world has ever seen is going to be smashed to smithereens.
Yeah, well, I don't think it'll be a meteorite.
Outside the hospital, Josh and Alice are having a nice friendly discussion when Des rudely interrupts, telling Josh to leave because him and Alice have a breakfast date. At breakfast, Des tries his hardest to destroy Alice's view of Josh. He tells her that Josh is borderline psychotic. He warns her to stay away, says that he's outright insane, that he belongs in the loony bin. He insists that Josh is dangerous and Alice needs to stay away. However, Alice is probably the most emotionally intelligent character in this film, and she sees that Josh clearly is not like that, and she proceeds to go on a lunch date with him as he has a book idea he thinks she should publish. Alice's lunch date with Josh ends up pretty much mirroring her one with Des, except this one's a little more endearing.
Did he tell you the story about how he was traumatized by a Radcliffe girl, taking off her shirt, suddenly revealing her largish breasts, which he'd never thought about before? He tells that story all the time, to get sympathy and to justify himself as if he were the victim of female aggressiveness and duplicity.
That wasn't true?
No, it was true. He was the victim of female aggressiveness and duplicity, but so was everyone else. Not everyone then went on a rampage exploiting the opposite sex.
Back at the apartment, Charlotte's in a panic, and she tells Alice that she's missed her period by a couple of days. Alice is confused at her concern because she thought she wanted Jimmy Steinway's babies, as she's put it.
I'm sorry I haven't been more of a help. I've been a little preoccupied myself. I'm late for my period.
How late?
A day.
A day late and you're worried?
I'm sure I'm pregnant.
Isn't that what you wanted?
What do you mean?
I thought you said you wanted to have Jimmy Steinway's babies.
Yeah, but Not this way.
Even though she may not want his babies right now, Charlotte prepares to tell Jimmy that she is potentially pregnant with his child. Because it's such a sensitive conversation, Charlotte wants Alice out of the apartment for the night. Alice uses this opportunity to go on a romantic walk with Josh. On this walk, Josh tells her the story of his depression. The true story this time, not the embellished one that Des gave.
What happened with your depression?
Nothing at first. I just went back to Cambridge very depressed. Then there was the incident at the Hayes Bickford, after which I was taken to Mass Mental for observation. While there, I cut my hand trying to open a stuck window, and they put me on a suicide watch. So I don't think I was ever really suicidal. At least no more than a lot of people that age.
After Josh explains himself to Alice, he asks her whether she thinks he's a wacko. She smirks and nods a little. When Josh and Alice arrive back at the apartment, they're greeted with an ambulance outside and paramedics rushing Charlotte into it on a stretcher. Josh and Alice then go to ask Jimmy what happened, and he says that he was trying to express that they feel they should see other people when her period started and she fainted. At the hospital the next day, Alice goes to visit Charlotte and asks for advice on her date with Josh and wondering why he hasn't called yet. Charlotte is of very little help to Alice, wondering what she thought would happen if she agreed with the guy on being a wacko. We then get a scene that isn't necessarily crucial to the plot, but it's crucial for showing us how mean-spirited and tone-deaf people can be. Alice goes to the pharmacy to pick up her medication for her herpes, and the pharmacist, for some reason, thinks it's a good idea to say sorry to her as he hands her the medication. Back outside the club, agents are getting ready for the sting operation. Josh runs in ahead to warn Des that it's about to go down and he should get out, but ends up catching him cheating on Alice with some other woman. Des seems overall pretty unconcerned about the drug bust and the potential of losing his job or going to jail, but instead chases after Josh and begs him not to tell Alice that he cheated.
Jesus Christ, you're not going to use that against me with Alice, are you? Francesco's just feeling terribly needy tonight. It has nothing to do with how I feel about Alice.
Bernie tries to escape with the evidence, but is caught by Josh. Back at the apartment, Alice is resting when Jimmy arrives to pick up some things. The two get to talking and Alice reveals that she used to have feelings for Jimmy. Jimmy is shocked by this, saying he thought she was always more interested in Tom.
There's no chance of you getting infatuated with me again, is there?
Alice thankfully shuts him down, as she doesn't want to hurt Charlotte. This scene is honestly kind of painful to watch because it's proof that Alice is a much better friend to Charlotte than Charlotte is to her. Des ends up trying to flee the country to avoid prosecution, using Jimmy's new job in Barcelona as a means to get out of the country. Des is still somewhat upset with Jimmy for working so long with Josh without Des's knowledge. This causes the two to debate whether or not Brutus was truly a good friend to Julius Caesar. Jimmy argues he is, as help can come in many forms, and that help may have been stabbing Caesar in the back.
By stabbing him in the back, Brutus was a good friend to Caesar?
The being a good man rhetoric is rich and ironic coming from Jimmy, as he's using his job in Barcelona to avoid having the mature breakup conversation with Charlotte. Alice then goes to the hospital once again and finds Charlotte distraught over Jimmy leaving her. She questions Alice, saying that they had been so friendly lately, being suspicious that Alice had something to do with him leaving. Alice confesses that Jimmy did mention having feelings for her, but she turned him down. Charlotte, being entirely unreasonable, blames Alice wholeheartedly for Jimmy's leaving, even though it was his choice, not Alice's. She did nothing to actively steal away Jimmy, but Charlotte actively interrupted Alice's love life frequently. But it seems Alice can withstand being mistreated more than Charlotte can, as Charlotte says that this is the first and last straw and she's moving out. As the girls argue and cry, Dan interrupts to tell them that their publishing house has been merged with Simon & Schuster, and a bunch of people may be losing their jobs. We then cut to Dan, Des, Charlotte, and Josh, filing for unemployment. It would seem that Des ended up making the right choice and staying to testify, proving that maybe some people can change. The group walk down the street and discuss the next steps for them. Josh says he has to go because he has a lunch date with Alice. Des doesn't like hearing this and questions Josh's mental state. But Josh reassures the group that he's doing just fine and Alice is paying for lunch because she was able to make associate editor after being able to recover from her fraudulent author scam.
Alice made editor.
Associate editor.
Well, what happened with her book? I thought it was some kind of fiasco.
What Alice did rather cleverly was shift the category from nonfiction to self-actualization. The book jackets hadn't been printed yet. Reincarnation, life after death, mumbo-jumbo of all kinds has been highly commercial throughout the history of book publishing. The first printed book was a Bible.
They then run into Van, who's walking to the unemployment office. He expresses that disco is dead and nobody wants to go out anymore. This causes Josh to go on a deeply impassioned speech that's frankly a little goofy, but I love it, about how disco will never die, and it's more than just an era of silly music and fun clothes. Here, I'll just play the clip for you.
Disco will never be over. It will always live in our minds and hearts. Something like this, that was this big and this important and this great, will never die. Oh, for a few years, maybe many years, it'll be considered passé and ridiculous. It'll be misrepresented and caricatured and sneered at, or worse, completely ignored. People will laugh about John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John, white polyester suits and platform shoes and going like this. But we had nothing to do with those things and still love disco. Those who didn't understand will never understand. Disco was much more and much better than all that. Disco was too great and too much fun to be gone forever. It's got to come back someday. I just hope it will be in our own lifetimes. Sorry, I've got a job interview this afternoon and I was trying to get revved up, but most of what I said, I believe.
In the final scene, we see Josh and Alice on the subway on their way to lunch. They begin to dance as the song Love Train by the OJs begins to play. Soon, all the passengers on the subway join in.
Love train, the next stop that we make will be England. Tell all the folks in Russia and China too. Don't you know that it's time to get on board and let this train keep on riding.
And that was The Last Days of Disco. Now, I just want to talk about some of the aspects of the film that make it one of my all-time favorites. One aspect of this film I love, and just one of the aspects I love about Whit Stillman's directorial style, is his ability to capture the feeling of a particular moment in time. The clothes, soundtrack, and set design all contribute to paint a vivid portrait of the disco era. But the film isn't just for nostalgia's sake. It also touches on themes of search for identity and the complexities of relationship, which still are very much prevalent today. Another standout element of the film is the dialogue. Whit Stillman has a talent for crafting these conversations with words that people would never use conversationally, but it still makes it feel natural. All the characters in The Last Days of Disco are well developed and nuanced, and this isn't a mistake. It's in part due to what the actors bring to the table in terms of performances and Whit Stillman's directorial and writing style. Overall, The Last Days of Disco is a charming and insightful film that I highly recommend. If you're a fan of period pieces and movies that just capture the feeling of an era, or even if you're just more of a fan of witty writing and good character development, this is a movie for you. So, thank you for watching. This was my first video. I want to make more. I intend on doing a series where I review every film in the Criterion collection, which is why I started with The Last Days of Disco. I could have gone back to The Grand Illusion, but I just wanted to start with one that I'm comfortable with first. But yeah, so thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments down below. Bye.